Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the surprisingly turbulent world of medieval fashion policing, where your hat could literally land you in hot water. Imagine, if you will, the flickering firelight casting long shadows on rough-hewn stone walls. You're bundled in scratchy wool, perhaps a little too much of it, or perhaps not enough of the right kind. Outside, the wind howls a mournful tune, and a figure in a heavy cloak passes, their silhouette barely visible. You either find embroidered sleeves with a pang of something, envy, admiration, or perhaps a nervous tremor, wondering if their ostentatious display might somehow implicate you in a wider societal ill. Because in the medieval world, what you wore wasn't just a personal choice. It was a public statement, an economic indicator, and, more often than not, a direct challenge to the established order. You probably won't survive this journey unscathed, at least not your modern sensibilities about personal freedom. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the dawn of civilization, long before any thought of velvet doublets or pointed pelanes, yet the seeds of sumptuary laws are already being sown in the fertile ground of human hierarchy. Think back to ancient Rome, or even further, to the early city-states of Mesopotamia. Even then, the powerful and the pious understood that visual cues reinforced status. It wasn't about fashion as we know it, but about clear distinctions. You see a Roman senator in his broad purple stripe on his toga, the laticlavus, and instantly you understand his rank. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a rule, often unwritten but implicitly enforced by social pressure and the occasional glare from someone who did have the right to wear purple. The dyeing process for Tyrian purple was incredibly expensive, requiring thousands of murex nails for just a tiny amount of pigment. It was, therefore, a natural flex for the elite. Imagine the stench of a purple dye workshop. Not exactly Chanel, no. 5. Is it? Yet, the result was pure, unadulterated power. Moving forward a little, you encounter early Greek laws, which sometimes stipulated what women could wear to public gatherings or mourning ceremonies. It wasn't about preventing extravagance as much as maintaining decorum and preventing excessive displays of grief, which could sometimes get a little dramatic. You can picture it, a philosopher stroking his beard, tut-tutting at the sight of a woman in particularly bright fabrics at a funeral. My dear, a bit much, wouldn't you say? Don't want to upset the social fabric, now, do we? It's a subtle form of control, certainly, but control nonetheless. The underlying philosophy is simple. Visible wealth and status, if unchecked, could destabilize society. If a newly rich merchant could dress like a seasoned nobleman, how would anyone know who to defer to? It's like everyone's suddenly driving the same luxury car, regardless of income. It just messes with the signals. In many ancient societies, the lines were clearly drawn. Slaves wore plain tunics, soldiers had their uniforms, and citizens of varying ranks possessed specific privileges in dress. It wasn't about preventing people from owning nice things. It was about preventing them from displaying those nice things if they hadn't earned the right, or more accurately, hadn't been born into the right. You might be wondering, what's the big deal? Let people wear what they want. And you'd be expressing a very modern sentiment. But for ancient and medieval societies, the concept of social mobility, while present to an extent, was generally viewed with suspicion if it manifested too overtly. Historians still argue whether these early laws were primarily about reinforcing social stratification or about moralizing against perceived decadence. Was it fear of class confusion, or fear of divine wrath brought on by excessive pride and luxury? Probably a healthy dose of both, like a particularly strong medieval ale, hits you from multiple angles. For example, in ancient China, during various dynasties, strict regulations governed the colors, fabrics, And even the embroidery patterns allowed for different ranks within the imperial court and wider society. Imagine mistakenly showing up to court in a bright imperial yellow tunic. You wouldn't just be fashionably challenged. You'd be challenging the emperor himself. That's a rapid career progression from fashion faux pas to off with your head. Talk about a statement piece. These ancient roots, whether in Rome, Greece, or China, laid the groundwork for what was to come in the medieval period. The fundamental idea that clothing communicated and therefore needed to be regulated persisted. It wasn't just about showing off, it was about maintaining order, both social and, in the eyes of the church, moral. As you shift your gaze towards the European Middle Ages, you'll see these ancient precedents morph and intensify, driven by new economic realities and the ever-present shadow of religious doctrine. The simple purple stripe of a Roman senator would evolve into a dizzying array of fabrics, furs, and fasteners, each more laden with meaning and potential legal peril than the last. The stage is set for a truly peculiar era of fashion policing, where your choice of trim could literally be a crime.
As the gentle hum of our imaginary fan continues, you find yourself transported from the dusty annals of antiquity into the vibrant, yet rigidly structured world of the High Middle Ages. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and perhaps a faint whiff of unwashed humanity, overlaid with the tantalizing aroma of baking bread from a nearby oven. Here, the landscape of sumptuary law truly begins to flourish. Like a particularly thorny rosebush, its rules and regulations reaching out to ensnare anyone who dared to step out of line. Sartorially speaking, of course. The central pillar of medieval society, you quickly realize, is its absolute obsession with social order. Everyone had their place. From the lowliest serf tilling the lord's fields, to the most exalted king presiding over his court. This wasn't just a convenient arrangement. It was seen as divinely ordained, a reflection of God's own cosmic plan. Mess with the hierarchy, and you're not just being rebellious, you're challenging God. And trust me, you don't want to be on the wrong side of that particular fashion police force. Clothing, therefore, became an incredibly potent tool for reinforcing these distinctions. You, as an observer, would immediately be able to tell a knight from a merchant, a cleric from a common laborer, simply by their attire. It was a visual shorthand, a nonverbal language understood by everyone. Imagine trying to navigate a medieval marketplace where everyone wore the same neutral, unadorned clothes. Utter chaos. Would you know who to bow to? Who to sell your turnips to at a slightly higher price? It would be like trying to play a game of chess where all the pieces look identical, utterly bewildering. The rise of a new wealthy merchant class in bustling towns and cities created a particular headache for the traditional aristocracy. These new money individuals, often richer than some impoverished nobles, started to ape the dress of their social superiors. You can almost hear the indignant sputtering of an old baron, that draper. In silk? Why? The audacity. He smells of fish and profit, not generations of land ownership. This blurring of lines was precisely what sumptuary laws aimed to prevent. They weren't just about preventing extravagance. They were about preserving the visible boundaries of a rigid class system. So what did these laws target? You'll find a bewildering array of restrictions. Take, for instance, the English Statute of Apparel of 1363. This gem decreed that servants and laborers were to wear only blanket and russet, and could not wear any gold, silver, or silk. If you were a yeoman or an artisan, you could branch out slightly, perhaps a simple broadcloth, but definitely no furs other than lamb or rabbit. God forbid you got your hands on some ermine. That was strictly for the nobility, and even then, often only for specific ranks. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these laws was economic to curb spending on imports or purely social to reinforce class distinctions. It's probably a bit like wondering if your cat loves you for your personality or for the food bowl. It's often a combination. The colors you wore were also heavily policed. Bright, saturated dyes were expensive and thus restricted. Reds, blues, and purples were often the preserve of the elite. You, a humble peasant, would likely be clad in undyed wools, browns, grays, and muted greens. Imagine the sheer joy of seeing someone in a vibrant tunic. It would be like seeing a peacock among pigeons. You'd probably gasp, then quickly avert your eyes, hoping not to get caught staring. Length of garments was another point of contention. In the later Middle Ages, men's tunics started getting shorter, revealing more of their legs. This was often seen as scandalous and immodest by older generations in the church. You might be a dashing young knight keen to show off your shapely calves in a stylishly short doublet, only to be met with the stern disapproval of a local cleric muttering about vanity and the temptations of the flesh. It's the medieval equivalent of your parents complaining about your ripped jeans. Some things never change, do they? Even the shape of your shoes could be regulated. The infamous palanes or crocos, long-pointed shoes, became a major fashion statement in the 14th and 15th centuries. The longer your point, the higher your status. Some points were so long they had to be tied to the wearer's knee to prevent tripping. Imagine trying to walk gracefully in shoes that are a foot or more longer than your actual foot. You'd be shuffling along, looking like a rather dapper duck. Laws soon came in, limiting the length of these points based on social rank. A commoner might be allowed a 6-inch point, a knight 12 inches, and a prince, well, prince could practically trip himself over with a 24-inch point if he so desired. The absurdity of it all is quite charming in retrospect. The church played a significant role in advocating for sumptuary laws, viewing excessive display as a sin of pride and vanity, distracting from spiritual devotion. Sermons would thunder against the evils of extravagant dress, especially among women, who were often depicted as the primary instigators of sartorial sin. Oh, sister, put away those silken sleeves. Remember the humble shroud that awaits us all. You can almost hear the fiery rhetoric echoing through cold stone churches. It wasn't just about maintaining social order. It was about saving your soul from the temptations of a particularly fetching hat. So as you walk through this bustling medieval town, you observe the rich tapestry of cloth and color, understanding that every stitch, every hue, every length of fabric is a carefully placed piece in a complex social puzzle. And woe betide anyone who tried to insert a piece where it didn't belong. The laws were there, sometimes ignored, often resented, but always lurking, ready to remind you of your place. With the stage set and the social hierarchy firmly established in your mind, let's delve deeper into the very specific, sometimes bizarre, sartorial excesses that sumptuary laws desperately tried and often failed to curb. You're now navigating a landscape where a particularly jaunty feather or a richly lined cloak could be seen as an act of rebellion, a direct affront to the powers that be. One of the most mainstream historical facts about medieval sumptuary laws is their repeated focus on the regulation of luxury fabrics. Silk, velvet, and brocade were the rock stars of the textile world, imported from far-off lands via arduous trade routes, making them incredibly expensive and thus instant status symbols. If you were a simple merchant, a well-to-do burgher perhaps, and you managed to get your hands on a bolt of shimmering Venetian silk, you might be tempted to fashion yourself a grand tunic. But alas, the laws were often clear. Silk was for knights, for ladies of noble birth, for high-ranking clergy, and certainly not for someone whose primary concern was the price of wool. Imagine the sheer audacity. You'd be dressed like a peacock among chickens and everyone would know it. The vibrant sheen of silk, the soft pile of velvet, these weren't just pretty. They were loud declarations of wealth that medieval society found deeply unsettling when worn by the wrong people. Beyond the fabric itself, the sheer volume of material used was often regulated. In the later Middle Ages, particularly for women, gowns could consume vast quantities of fabric, creating flowing trains, wide skirts, and voluminous sleeves. A dress might literally sweep the floor behind you for several feet, trailing dirt and drawing gasps of admiration or disapproval. The more fabric, the more expensive, the more ostentatious. Laws would sometimes stipulate the maximum length of a train, or even outright forbid them for certain ranks. You can almost picture the scene. A woman magnificent in her sweeping gown, trying to gracefully navigate a muddy street, while a local official eyes her train with a measuring stick, ready to levy a fine for excess. It's a delightful image, isn't it? It's the height of fashion literally getting bogged down in the muck. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit, let's talk about dagging. This rather unfortunate-sounding term refers to the practice of cutting decorative patterns into the edges of garments, sleeves, hems, collars, and even hoods. These cuts could be simple scallops, leaf shapes, or intricate geometric designs. What started as a modest embellishment soon escalated into an absolute frenzy of artistic destruction. People would dag their clothes so aggressively that the edges would look like elaborate lace, or even a fringe of tiny flags. This wasn't just aesthetic. It consumed extra fabric and, crucially, wasted good material, often leading to rapid fraying. The church and lawmakers absolutely hated it. They saw it as excessive, wasteful, and leading to immodesty. Especially when some daggings became so deep, they revealed glimpses of undergarments. Imagine a medieval fashionista rocking a tunic with sleeves so dagged they looked like shredded lettuce. A definite head-turner, and very likely a fine. You might think, well, that's just a bit of creative flair. But for medieval authorities, it was a clear sign of moral decay and economic irresponsibility. And there were the furs. Oh, the furs. More than just warmth, furs were the ultimate signifier of status. Ermine, mink, sable. These were strictly reserved for royalty and the highest nobility. Their pristine white, often dotted with black tails, was an unmistakable badge of power. Lesser nobles might be allowed squirrel or fox, and for the common folk, lamb's wool rabbit, or perhaps if you were lucky, a bit of plain sheepskin. To wear a fur above your station was a huge no-no. You wouldn't just be comfortable, you'd be committing a social crime. It's like turning up to a black tie event in a tracksuit made of diamonds. Technically opulent, but completely inappropriate for the context. Historians still argue whether the restriction on furs was more about protecting native resources or simply about maintaining visual class distinctions. It's a bit of a chicken or egg scenario, isn't it? But you can be sure that if you spotted a peasant in ermine, there'd be some serious questions asked. Even colors themselves could be policed. As we touched on, bright, expensive dyes like cochineal red or woad blue were regulated. But sometimes, specific colors carried specific meanings beyond mere cost. Yellow, for example, was occasionally associated with Jews in some regions. Forced upon them as a distinguishing mark, a grim example of sumptuary law, used for discriminatory purposes rather than just class control. Or green, sometimes linked to merchants, a color of prosperity and commerce. While not always strictly forbidden for others, wearing a color that strongly identified with another social group could still invite unwanted scrutiny. Accessories, too, fell under the watchful eye of the law. Jewelry, naturally, was a major target. Gold chains, rings, precious stones, all were meticulously controlled based on income or rank. You might fantasize about a hefty gold ring, but if your station didn't permit it, wearing one was inviting trouble. Even belts, when richly adorned with silver buckles or elaborate embroidery, could be deemed excessive. It seems no detail was too small for the medieval fashion police. They truly believed the devil was in the details, especially if those details were gilded. And let's not forget the notorious pointed shoes that we briefly mentioned. These weren't just a fleeting trend, it became an obsession. The length of the toe was directly proportional to the wearer's social status, ranging from modest points for commoners to absurdly long ones for nobles, sometimes extending up to 2 feet beyond the foot. You might think, how on earth did they walk? The answer is, with difficulty, often tying the tip to their knee with a chain or string. Laws explicitly limited these lengths, leading to comical situations where someone might have to literally snip the end off their shoe to comply. Imagine a medieval official with a tape measure sternly eyeing your footwear. It's a truly absurd image, yet it was a very real concern for many. So, as you take in the vibrant, sometimes ridiculous sights of medieval fashion, you understand that every frill, every fold, every hue was a potential statement, a potential violation. The era's obsession with visible status led to a glorious, flamboyant display that simultaneously spawned an equally fervent desire to police it. Having explored the dazzling array of fashion trends that dared to challenge medieval social order, you were now ready to witness the equally ingenious and, sometimes utterly comical ways authorities attempted to enforce these sumptuary laws and how people ever resourceful found ways to evade them. It's a classic cat and mouse game played out with silks, furs, and ridiculously long shoes. Enforcement of sumptuary laws was, you quickly discover, a patchy and inconsistent affair. It wasn't like today, with a dedicated police force solely focused on fashion violations. Instead, responsibility often fell to local town councils, market officials, or even parish priests. Imagine your local mayor, perhaps a bit portly himself, peering disapprovingly at your slightly too long sleeves. Or a stern-faced cleric, delivering a fiery sermon against the satanic daggings on your tunic. The penalties varied widely, from hefty fines that could seriously dent your purse to public shaming, or even the confiscation of the offending garments. In some extreme cases, repeated offenses could lead to imprisonment, though this was less common for mere fashion crimes. One common method of policing was through inspections at city gates or market squares. You might be strolling into town, looking rather pleased with your new, slightly above your station velvet doublet, only to be stopped by an official wielding a ruler or a very keen eye. They'd measure your shoe points, check your fabric, and scrutinize your fur. Imagine the awkward conversation. "Excuse me, good sir, but is that ermine? Do you believe your station only permits rabbit? Yes?" It's a scene right for a medieval sitcom, isn't it? The sheer audacity of being stopped and measured for your outfit. Another strategy was to rely on informants. Yes, people snitched on their neighbors for fashion violations. Perhaps a jealous rival, a disgruntled former employee, or simply someone who enjoyed seeing others get into trouble. Oh my lord. I do believe that Baker's wife was wearing a gold chain last Sunday, and we all know her husband barely makes enough for a decent loaf. This system undoubtedly led to a good deal of petty vengeance and local feuds, adding another layer of social tension to already complex communities. Historians still argue whether the primary deterrent was the actual legal penalty or the pervasive social pressure and fear of being publicly called out. You can imagine the whispers spreading through the town, can't you? Did you hear about Agnes? Fined for her too wide sleeves. TSK, TSK. However, the ingenuity of medieval fashionistas in sidestepping these regulations was truly remarkable. People are always going to find loopholes, aren't they? One common tactic was to simply wear the forbidden garments underneath a permitted outer layer. You might have a magnificent silk lining to your cloak, visible only when you subtly flash it open, or a richly embroidered kirtle hidden beneath a plain wool overdress. It was a private rebellion, a secret luxury enjoyed only by the wearer, and perhaps a select few confidants. It's like wearing fancy underwear, nobody sees it, but you know it's there. And sometimes that's enough to feel deliciously rebellious. Another popular evasion technique was to exploit the ambiguity of materials and dyes. If pure scarlet silk was forbidden, perhaps a cleverly dyed linen, or a blend of wool and a tiny percentage of silk could pass muster. Or maybe a fur that looked remarkably like ermine, but was technically a more common animal, cleverly treated and dyed. The nuances of fabric composition and dye quality could be debated endlessly, giving clever tailors and their clients wiggle room. It was an early form of brand name knockoffs, but with higher stakes. Then there's the sheer geographic and temporal inconsistency of the laws. Sumptuary laws were rarely uniformly applied across an entire kingdom. What was forbidden in London might be perfectly acceptable in Bristol. Or what was illegal in 1350 might be overlooked by 1370. This meant that traveling, merchants or nobles might temporarily flout the rules with less risk, or that local interpretations varied wildly. You could be perfectly dressed for one town, only to be considered a fashion criminal in the next. It's enough to make you pack a very versatile wardrobe, isn't it? The irony, of course, is that, despite all these efforts, sumptuary laws were largely ineffective in the long run. Like a stubborn river, always finds a way. New trends emerged, old laws became obsolete, and the relentless march of economic change with new wealth constantly being generated by merchants and artisans meant that people would always strive to display their success. The laws were trying to hold back the tide with a sieve. A particularly delightful irony is that the very items forbidden to commoners often became even more desirable. Scarcity breeds demand, after all. If everyone could wear velvet, it wouldn't be nearly as exciting as when it's strictly forbidden. Think of the poulains again. Despite repeated legal attempts to shorten them, they persisted for decades, with various royal decrees and city ordinances trying to rein in their ludicrous length. It became a point of pride, a subtle act of defiance, to wear the longest points you could get away with. It's a testament to the enduring power of vanity and the human desire to express oneself. even if that expression means risking a fine or a stern lecture. You might be a humble shoemaker, but you'd make sure your shoes were just a tad longer than legally allowed. A subtle nod to the absurdity of it all. So, as you observe this elaborate dance of prohibition and circumvention, you understand that while the authorities tried their best to police fashion, the spirit of individual expression, however subtly it manifested, was a force that even medieval law struggled to contain. It's a reminder that truly effective social control often comes from within, rather than from external decree. As the sun begins its slow descent on our medieval journey, casting long, fading shadows, you find yourself witnessing the gradual, almost imperceptible decline of sumptuary laws. Like ancient ruins slowly reclaimed by nature, their grip on society loosened, their decrees less feared, their purpose increasingly moot. Yet their legacy, you'll discover, lingers in surprising echoes within our modern world. The slow fade of sumptuary laws wasn't a sudden dramatic repeal, but rather a gradual erosion fueled by several factors. Firstly, the rise of nation-states and centralized governments meant that local, fragmented laws became harder to enforce comprehensively. Kings and parliaments had bigger fish to fry, wars to fight, taxes to collect, rebellions to quell than policing the length of someone's shoe points. The sheer administrative burden of upholding these detailed, often contradictory regulations across a whole kingdom became simply too great. You can imagine a harried royal clerk buried under scrolls of legislation, sighing another complaint about dagging. Can't we just focus on the plague for a bit? Secondly, and perhaps most crucially, was the relentless march of economic change in the burgeoning merchant class. As trade routes expanded and wealth accumulated outside the traditional landowning aristocracy, the lines of social distinction blurred beyond recognition. A merchant might easily be wealthier than a minor noble, and their children might be educated alongside the gentry. When you have a rapidly, upwardly mobile population, trying to restrict their visible displays of wealth becomes an exercise in futility. It's like trying to stop a flood with a teacup. It's the very foundation upon which sumptuary laws were built. A rigid, static social hierarchy was beginning to crumble. Historians still argue whether the decline was primarily due to the impracticality of enforcement or the irrelevance of the underlying social structure. It's likely a bit of both, a symbiotic decay where one fed the other. Moreover, the sheer human desire for novelty and expression proved unstoppable. Fashion, by its very nature, is dynamic. What was scandalous one decade became commonplace the next. Law struggled to keep pace with the ever-evolving trends. Trying to legislate against newfangled styles was like trying to catch smoke at simply reformed elsewhere. The absurdity of some laws, like the regulation of shoe points, eventually made them targets of ridicule rather than respect, further eroding their authority. You can picture people openly mocking the outdated statutes, perhaps subtly, but effectively, rendering them impotent. By the 17th and 18th centuries, while some sumptuary laws technically remained on the books in various places, they were largely unenforced curiosities. The focus shifted from explicit legal dictation of dress to more subtle forms of social etiquette and moral persuasion. The rising bourgeois society began to value modesty and refined taste more than overt displays of inherited status. It became less about what you couldn't wear by law, and more about what a respectable person wouldn't wear out of propriety. It was a quieter form of policing, operating through polite disapproval rather than legal decree. Yet, the echoes of sumptuary laws, you realize, are surprisingly persistent in our modern world. While we no longer have laws dictating who can wear silk or ermine, the fundamental human impulse to judge, categorize, and even control through dress remains. Think about dress codes today: school uniforms, corporate attire, religious coverings, or even the unspoken rules of a fancy restaurant. These are all modern descendants of sumptuary principles. They may not be legally binding in the same way, but they certainly dictate what is considered appropriate or acceptable based on context and perceived status. Consider the ongoing debates around fast fashion and ethical consumption. While not laws, the societal pressure to consume less, to buy sustainably, or to reject overtly luxurious brands can be seen as a modern, morally driven form of sumptuary thinking. We're not legally forbidden from buying cheap, disposable clothing, but there's a growing social disapproval directed at it, echoing the medieval condemnation of wasteful extravagance. It's a fascinating parallel, isn't it? It's the same impulse to regulate consumption, just with different targets and motivations. Even the way we perceive and judge others based on their clothings, the immediate assumptions we make about their wealth, profession, or personality is a direct inheritance from centuries of using dress as a primary social signal. You glance at someone's designer handbag, or their well-tailored suit, or their distressed denim, and you instantly form an opinion. That's the legacy of sumptuary laws, the understanding that clothing speaks volumes. It's a quirk of human nature that even without formal laws, we still police each other's attire. Perhaps with a raised eyebrow or a whispered comment, rather than a fine. So as you reflect on this peculiar history, you see that while the medieval sumptuary laws themselves have largely vanished into the archives, the principles behind them, the desire to maintain order, define status, curb excess, and project identity through clothing are still very much alive. We may not fear a fashion police officer measuring our shoe tips, but the subtle, powerful forces of social expectation still guide our sartorial choices, proving that humans, for all their progress, still haven't quite outgrown the need to tell each other what to wear. The light is fading now, and the vibrant tapestry of medieval life begins to soften, its sharp edges blurring into the quiet of the night. The clatter of hooves, the murmur of the marketplace, the stern pronouncements of the fashion police all recede, leaving behind a gentle silence. You can let go of the rigid rules, the fear of missteps in fabric or fur. The worries of the past, like the distant echo of a forgotten bell, no longer hold sway. Close your eyes. Let your mind drift from the intricate patterns of dagging and the absurd lengths of poulaines. The journey is complete, and all that remains is the comforting stillness, a sense of peace washing over you like a soft, warm blanket. Subscribe to the channel to get the next part. Then you will get the next part as soon as it is uploaded.